Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm an English teacher and a novelist, over 30 published novels. And on this week's episode, we have a returning guest, though this is the first time I've been able to talk to her. We're going to be talking about the book Jeanne for Murder by Jeanne Burrows-Johnson. And this is part of a series, and we'll go back and explain some of that, and readers who are interested can catch up on previous episodes as well. But before we get too far into things, Jeanne, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to get to meet the people over the air, and I'm Jeanne Burrows-Johnson. I'm an author of both fiction and nonfiction. Today we're discussing fiction, and I'm focused for the most part on life in Hawaii, where I lived for over 20 years. I hold a degree in history, BA I should say, from the University of Hawaii, where I worked as a graduate teaching assistant in the university's World Civilizations program. Professionally, I worked in the performing arts, education, and marketing. Today I'm going to share the prologue to Jeanne for Murder, the fourth Natalie Sechrist Hawaiian mystery. I'll begin by giving you an aphorism. I have an aphorism that starts every chapter. Death never takes the wise man by surprise. He is always ready to go. From Jean de La Fontaine, 1621 to 1695. I sit at the back of a darkened theater-like space, listening to incantation by voices male and female. The word Om whispers unceasingly across the large room, as though the chanters take no breath between their intonations of the repeated sound. I inhale and exhale, nearly able to join in with the prolonged nasal baritone range of the prayerful. At the front of the rows of pews are plum-colored silk drapes that fall from an unseen ceiling. Framing this tableau are the sepia-toned edges one might expect to see on a vintage photograph. Abruptly, the drapes sweep open and rise slowly before disappearing. A wide shrine area is revealed. In the center of its black floor is an altar with a golden standing Buddha, flanked by two attendant statuettes. On the far left is another smaller altar with a statue of a Buddha in seated position. To the right and left edges of the space are podiums from which the ministers of the temple address their congregation. Between the podiums, white pedestals of varying height support a variety of sacred statues. With the images of revered figures from numerous Asian religions, this scene is clearly an altered presentation of reality. Despite the profusion of mixed faiths, I recognize where I am. It is an exaggerated representation of a Japanese Shin Buddhist temple. I have visited it and written about on numerous occasions. While I hear the soft murmuring of voices, I know I am alone, and although I am surrounded by rich fragrances, there are no lit candles or incense on the altar. My reverie is broken by the reverberations of a large bell. As if on cue, the unrealistic elements of the scene evaporate, and the true sanctuary of the temple is revealed. A middle-aged minister now enters from a door upstage left. Her hair is cut short, providing an attractive frame to her face. Although she wears no makeup, her skin glows with an inner joy. She wears black-rimmed glasses, and I cannot clearly see her eyes. Unlike many of her male counterparts, who wear suits under their robes, she is dressed traditionally, even to the black gaiters on her feet. On top of the layered clothes hangs a plum-colored surplice, embroidered with a gold wisteria flower. As the minister walks serenely across the wide stage, she pauses to bow to honor the spirit of each of the four statues that are represented. However, afterwards, she turns and glides to the central altar, where she stands in contemplation before the standing Amida Buddha for a moment. She lights the candles and joss sticks of the incense before her and steps back a couple of paces. As I breathe in the room's intensifying scent, I hear the faint clicking of her prayer beads. I marvel at the peace and joy I feel, as though united with the woman who stands in front of me. At that point, everything freezes. A profound silence descends. I, like my surroundings, am transfixed, without movement of eye or breath, and then, amidst the idyllic scene, a single sharp sound explodes through my consciousness. I watch horrified as the gentle woman falls to the floor. and the sepia tones of my recurring visions envelop all of the room. And that is how Yen for Murder begins.
Thank you for sharing that. So it gives us a good sense of the style of mystery that you write. Tell us a little bit about your main character that readers are going to follow in this book. And for those who have read the series, she is a mainstay throughout.
She is, and her name is Natalie Sechrist. And she is a woman who has a background as a journalist. She's now reached a point in her later years. She's not old, not as old as I am, but she is a woman who has been very excited to learn about the world and travel all over. In fact, in one of the earlier books, she was caught, shall we say, in a very strange situation because she was in Israel at one point, and she was there when there was an attack on an interesting place in the country. And when that attack took place, she had to suddenly awaken from her, shall we say, slumber perhaps, of being a tourist, having fun in the country and all that. And all of a sudden now she has to face what is not an exciting position to be in. She is suddenly asked to become an on-air journalist and report on what has taken place. And so that becomes rather a scary situation for her. And those types of things have occurred with her in her life every once in a while. So we take our Natalie and we move forward with her into Hawaii. And it's in Hawaii that she has a number of situations that come up where the visions that she has had since childhood seem to awaken certain situations within her life. And all of a sudden now she is having to deal with situations that she never thought she would face because murderous situations come up. And so she has to go ahead and pay attention to what is taking place in life around her. And at that point, she, accompanied by her lovely little Miss Una, her feline companion, who keeps her out of mischief for the most part, she has to move forward in life and has to take a look at many situations that she never thought she would be finding. Now, she has a twin brother, and he actually had twins. I don't know if your readers are familiar with this, but quite often that happens, that twins produce more twins. And he is a psychologist. And he's not terribly fond of certain aspects of Natalie's life because she has a way of, following those visions, every once in a while get into trouble. She gets into trouble with them, with her brother. And so he's not necessarily happy to have those things take place. She has to follow through on what comes up in life. And another one of her companions is a former police officer. He is a man who's going to become a sweetheart in her life. She's a very lucky person to have these companions around her. And they end up actually working with a man who is he's actually had a vision of his own at one point, but he's he's a savvy kind of guy, let's put it that way. And in this particular book, what happens is that she has a situation where after he retired, there were certain cases that not so well with him. And he has had to follow through on, let's say, cold cases. And every time that has come up in the past books, he has ended up asking for the help of his former partner, John Diaz. And so John Diaz is a good buddy, and he helps them out every once in a while. And he has become aware of Natalie's special gifts. And because of that, he is a good buddy by the time we get to book 4. And so consequently, it's a good position for them to be in as friends. And consequently, John is with them in many different ways. In this particular case, he is aware of that cold case. And in that cold case, the minister was killed. And when she was killed, there was the statue of the Shakyamuni Buddha, an antique and very valuable piece. And when that happens, that means that there's an awful lot to be done. And so as they go through the case, they end up being involved with international auctions. And that means that I had to do a lot of research on all kinds of things that became evident that we would have to follow through on. So the question becomes, what has occurred in the discovery of this particular item. And consequently, we get to delve into certain situations that I, as I say, had to do a lot of research on. And I'm very grateful that I have a background in history, because it meant that I was able to take a look at a number of things that took place in the islands. And I actually found, well, I was familiar with a Buddhist temple that was very much an important site. It's the Hongpohongwangji Temple. And for those who may have visited Hawaii, it's on the Pali Highway. And knowing that means that visitors, again, from the islands, or people who simply have read commercialized information about Hawaii, will recognize. And it's on a highway where you go across from downtown Honolulu across to the windward side of the island. And I was very honored and pleased that I was able to share some of that information with people. And I do bring up an awful lot of cultural issues. At one point in the first book, Prospect for Murder, we get to take a look at some of what has taken place in the islands in terms of I'm hesitating here because I don't want to be too detailed, but we get into food and we get into culture and we get into all kinds of things that I hope the watchers of this series will find interesting. I hope that has answered some of your questions about it. Again, there's an awful lot in this book that has to do with the culture and the history. We even talked about Queen Liliuokalani, and she had a very interesting life. She was quite the modern woman for barely past the turn of into the 20th century. She had an awful lot to do with how the culture of Hawaii expanded, the city itself expanded, and she was noted for driving her own vehicle, and she called it her locomobile. A lot of people have found that pretty funny to think about this gracious queen who had lost her throne when the sugar planters took over the country. And she actually, she was so brave, she went to Congress and tried to get her country back. But unfortunately, that was not to be, and she spent much of her later years imprisoned in Iolani Palace. And that is why it's so important to people, visitors and non-visitors, to think about what it was like to have that take place in your life.
One of the things that stuck out to me and that I did want to talk with you about is the sense of place and the details that you bring into the story, that oftentimes you can tell when a writer is from an area or has lived there for a long time, where they're really familiar to the point that the small details come through in the storytelling. And even for people who are not familiar with that place, it adds a layer of reality to it that is not impossible, but often challenging to get to if you're, researching from your computer and you're not able to travel to a location. There's just certain things that you aren't able to experience and then bring into a story. I think it's great that we live in a time where we can do research from other locations and try to get to know a place without traveling there, because we don't all, unfortunately, have the means to go to every place we want to write about.
Oh, that's true.
But
yes,
that was something I noticed.
True.
You have a high level of detail with the food, with the culture, and even just the interactions and how your characters interact with each other, particularly people who are from different cultural or racial backgrounds. And having lived there, obviously that's a big part of that. But a lot of research, as you were saying, going into the aspects that maybe you didn't live yourself, as far as the history and the importance of that history to the local communities. So what was something that you felt like, having lived there for 20 plus years, that you still wanted to research and really make sure that you got accurate for creating that sense of place?
Oh, I think that's definitely true. I actually moved there just before my 21st birthday. And so it was a very important time for me to be there, and I was very honored to be there. I moved there, I guess we would put it this way. I was getting a divorce at the time. I helped run Highland Games. They were Hawaiian Highland Games, so there were Hawaiian events as well as there are just so many things that were taking place there at the time that I was there myself. And also another project that I have been involved with or was involved with was oral history is my specialty. And I worked with a wonderful Hawaiian woman. Her name was Caroline Kulia'ikanu'ukapu Wilcox de Lima Farias. And the Wilcox name is very important for those of you who know Hawaiian history. Robert Wilcox was one of her relatives, and she was a very important person in my life. And we were very involved in different types of things. Toward the end of her life, I helped her with donations that were made to St. Andrew's Priory School for girls, and I was also involved with other activities. So I was very immersed in life in Hawaii, and I felt very honored to be able to do that. And sometimes Auntie Carol would have me take her to special Hawaiian events. So I can say that I was very involved with the Hawaiian community, and I was very pleased that I was, able to help with certain things during the latter part of her life. She, coming from a very renowned family, she unfortunately was not able to, how do I want to put this? She was not able to become educated herself. And consequently, that meant that there were things that she would have enjoyed doing that she was not able to do. But she cared for her elders for a long time. And because of her caring for them, it meant that she was somewhat elevated in her exposure to the women of her native Hawaiian culture. And she was very involved with different aspects of life in her homeland. And in fact, I'll tell you one thing about her that will be coming out. She was a wonderful hula dancer. And she herself did not do the ancient hula, which is now very popularized. She was herself, she danced on the famous radio show, Hawaii Calls, that might ring a bell with some of your people. And she was so involved with one thing after another, but she was dancing hula in Waikiki for that radio show. And she was very involved with a lot of things that would surprise people. And part of that was the fact that she was dancing hula on December 6th. And if you will recall, that was the night before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And there are an awful lot of things that she has shared with me that has to do with the culture. And the things that she saw and that she experienced herself, as well as through these relatives that she had. Some of them were famous musicians, and some of them were just involved in so many different aspects of the life of the islands. And she was born so early, and then she did not die until it was the start of our new century. And so consequently, people are sometimes surprised to realize how enriched her life was, despite the fact that she was not able to have the full education that she would have enjoyed. She only went through 8th grade, and people are somewhat amazed when they hear that. But back in the good old days, there were a lot of situations where women were not well educated, especially in a place like Hawaii. And so consequently, again, your listeners may be surprised to be thinking, how could somebody get that far in life and not be experiencing what we take for granted today? Well, I don't mean to be political, but some of us took for granted until recently. And now we're living in a situation where that's no longer the case, because women are unfortunately losing many of their rights. But we won't go into that at this point. So I hope that gives people a fuller experience of some of what I did between my teaching in the performing arts when I first got to the islands, and then my marveling at what people are able to do with or without education, with or without cultural experiences that, again, we may be taking for granted. But, education is such a fascinating thing because it comes upon us in different ways. So I think that's part of what I have appreciated by the exposure that I had to formal education as well as cultural sharing. And so I hope that will make sense to you and to the people who are sharing this moment with us.
Yeah, I think that I've been catching up on stuff. We just kind of wrapped up the school year, and so I've been going through emails and podcasts and things that I had put off. And so I can't remember where I heard this quote or saw it, but someone was talking about what makes a story stand out. And there was the line that it's specificity that makes a story matter. And I think that is so true, because you also hear that quote of every story's already been told, it's just retold in different ways. But I think when we take those universal human experiences and then we put them in specific places with developed characters who have backgrounds and who are really in that experience with the reader. That's what makes those stories of standing up or speaking out or overcoming trials. Yes, we all know those story structures, but they can be told in different and unique ways. And so taking a lot of this history and how that history has impacted the area that you're writing, I think really adds this different layer to a story that it's like, yes, it's a murder mystery, cold case. Like we can put those labels on a story on your book, and that still doesn't really capture what it is until you get into the specific nature of why this story is happening to these characters in this place, in this time period. And I think that shines through in your story, that you took the time
thank you so
to
much.
put in those details that really let, at least for me as the reader experiencing it, let me feel like I was there, like I was part of the environment and the community.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. That means an awful lot to me because, again, yes, I have the background of having lived there and having been part of the culture. But, when you're touching someone else's culture, you have to be, as you know as an author, you have to be very cautious when you are dealing with things that have to do with another language. And there are issues. For instance, I use Hawaiian dialectic marking in my telling of the stories. And it's very, very important to honor that culture. And of course, as people are becoming more aware of what happened with our Native American culture, there are people that were, well, how do we want to put it? They were robbed of their culture in so many different ways. And in Hawaii, the people were definitely robbed of their culture. And they were, to begin with, women were told to cover their bodies. And so that was an important issue that had to be covered. But in addition to that, they were forbidden to speak Hawaiian for a very, very long time. And it made it very hard for the culture to rebuild and to bring alive, to relive what was the ancient culture. For one thing, American diet has not been very kind to the people of Hawaii, and they are relearning to use many of the ancient foods, and that's an important thing for people to be aware of. And so I've just, as I say, I've been very, very honored to be part of that. And I do want to admit to having made one mistake. I was a poor author in one sense, in that I did not realize I had transposed a princess's name with a queen's name. Oh my goodness, did I hear about that? It was a surprise to me that I had done that. But of course, I immediately wrote a mea culpa page on my author's page. We have to own up to errors that we may have made. And I think every author I've ever spoken to has a story like that, where they have made some kind of an error. And it can sound funny, but it's not funny when you're dealing with history and when you're dealing with another culture and you're trying really hard to honor it in every way that you can.
Well, and that's something that I think has been in the conversation and people are more aware of now than they used to be. We have cultural sensitivity readers and different types of sensitivity readers. Of course, can't remember the name of the person, but there was a podcast I was listening to where she was talking about being a sensitivity reader for authors who are writing autistic characters and trying to get that as accurate as possible and not continuing stereotypes. And I was like, yeah, that would be really helpful, because I would be intimidated to write a character that I didn't know well enough, like what that experience is really like. And I would end up making mistakes.
Yes.
So I'm glad that is part of the conversation in publishing more now than it used to be.
I think that's very true, that we're becoming more sensitive to what has taken place across our globe. There are so many people that are now becoming involved with one another's culture that it's a surprise, I guess we would say, for some people to have to recognize that their concept, well, if we look at our African American peoples who are learning about the native peoples with whom they were very aware of to know the part of Africa that their people came from. And they've now had to explore so many different aspects of the lives of their ancestors. And it's, just so many people are coming awake to what has taken place in the past. And I think it's surprising to many of us to think about it. My own family is primarily of European background, although I am told that there are some individuals who have been surprised to discover how far their families have gone from one place to another. There's a wonderful program on PBS, Following Your Roots. I'm not saying it correctly, but it's a marvelous, marvelous program. And, someone is assuming that my own family is primarily French and Danish, if you're going to look at percentages. But some of our ancestors have all of a sudden taken a look at where, quote, their people came from and are so surprised to discover that they are also part of their people came from Sudan, or they may have come from the Middle East. They may be Jewish, but it's only a certain part of their family that is of one culture or another culture that they had no idea of. And I find those programs to be fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's important to know where you come from individually, but also to better understand the communities that you live in and those influences from decades and hundreds of years and centuries of changes and influence. It really, the smallest things, they really carry forward through time. And I think being more aware of that is a really good thing today, and it helps us be a little bit more mindful of others' experiences. And
I think that's so true.
Well,
so
and
true.
I think there's a whole bunch more we could talk about, but we are actually already out of time and need to start wrapping up. We just scratched the surface.
I believe that. I feel honored that you've given me this time, and I am delighted that we've gotten to know one another a little bit, and I'll look forward to learning about all the books that you have written. That will be absolutely wonderful.
Well, and before we sign off, I did want to remind our listeners that the book is called Yen for Murder, and that's by Jeanne Burrows-Johnson. And Jeanne, where can people find you and the book online or in stores, if you are aware of which stores people might be able to frequent, either in this area or yours? Yeah, tell us where people can find you and your work.
I'd be delighted to do that. These days, so many people just go to Amazon, and certainly you can go to Amazon and you will find my materials that are there, and I'm very honored that people will go wherever they want to. There's so many places where you can order. Now, in the Tucson area, Barnes & Noble, most people are familiar with, and you can always, with a regular, quote, regular national book chain, you can order one of my books, and that is always a delightful way for me to get to know people who are interested in any of the 4 books, Prospect for Murder. But the thing is that I want people to understand that I want them to know they can go online. They will find me at JeanneBurrows-Johnson.com. They will also find that I'm available with another website I have, imaginingswordpower.com, because that is where I am able to offer people. I don't put recipes, by the way, you mentioned food, but they'll find recipes online, and they will find different ways that I am able to communicate with them. And I'm delighted to do so, my dear.
Good. I think it's always wonderful to hear from readers as well and just hear what they thought and their ideas or how much they enjoyed something. So that's always a fun experience as an author. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today and for sharing your book. I really appreciate the opportunity to read it and to get to know you a little better.
Well, thank you so much. I'll look forward to our visiting another time. Thank you so much.